They said she never left the manor, not in life, and not in death. When workers tore down the west wing of Ravensbrook in 1887, they found her, not in a grave, but behind a wall, perfectly preserved in a bridal gown that had yellowed into ivory, fingers still clutching a rosary, eyes wide open. No one was supposed to know. The official report said, no human remains discovered, but the men who saw her, who felt the cold air rush out of that sealed chamber, they never spoke again. And yet, the ledger from that same year vanished from the county archives, the family's name erased from the registry, as if the manor itself demanded silence. This isn't just a ghost story, this is a record of control, a ritualized disappearance dressed up as tragedy. And what you're about to hear has been suppressed for over a century, because it exposes the machinery behind that disappearance. A system older than nations, designed to bury not just bodies, but truth. The bride behind the wall was named Elara Ravensbrook, daughter of a family whose fortune was tied to a shadow network that financed early mind control research long before the world heard of psychological warfare. She was the first sacrifice of an institution that learned how to turn grief into obedience. Every wall in that manor is a metaphor for how power hides its sins. Behind every sealed door, a forgotten experiment. Behind every family crest, a secret oath. You're not here by accident. You're here because some part of you can feel it, that something's been buried in you too, that the walls aren't just in Ravensbrook, they're in your own mind. And once you hear what happened to Elara, and why her screams were sealed in stone, you'll never look at the architecture of power the same way again. Slow beat, tone shifts darker, because the real question isn't who buried her, it's who told them to. They called themselves the custodians of the veil, a circle so secret that even their existence was written in cipher, hidden in church donations, in coded ledgers, in marriages designed not for love, but for silence. The Ravensbrook family wasn't born into power. They were selected by it. In 1812, Thomas Ravensbrook was summoned to an unmarked estate outside Bath. There he met three men. No surnames, no titles. They spoke of architecture as ritual, geometry as control. They promised him a future beyond wealth, a legacy that would never die, as long as he built according to their design. What he didn't realize was that every stone, every archway of Ravensbrook Manor was more than decoration. It was programming, a lattice of sacred ratios meant to bend energy, emotion, even thought. The custodians had discovered something ancient, that geometry could trap consciousness. They called it the binding pattern. And Elara, his daughter, was to become its living core. She was raised like royalty, but treated like an offering. Her education was steeped in ritual music, mirror discipline, and dreams interpreted by masked mentors. They told her she was being prepared for union with the eternal. But what they meant was something else. A human consciousness tethered to the architecture, an eternal bride sealed to the manor itself. When her wedding day came, the candles burned blue. Witnesses later whispered that no groom arrived, that the ceremony ended with the ringing of a single bell, and the sound of hammering deep within the west wing. Days later, Thomas Ravensbrook vanished. The custodians withdrew from public record, and the manor became a tomb, a living resonance chamber humming with her last breath. But here's the truth no historian has dared to print, that the same geometric sequences carved into Ravensbrook's walls reappear in government architecture, university halls, even banking logos today. The pattern survived. The mind-binding continued, just under new names, new symbols, new programs. Elara's story wasn't erased because it was tragic. It was erased because it worked. And the real purpose of Ravensbrook Manor wasn't to mourn her, it was to replicate her. Low pause. The question is, how many of those replicas are still active, hidden in plain sight, walking among us, unaware they're carrying a blueprint older than their own memory? The West Wing was never meant to be entered again. After the night of the blue candles, servants were dismissed, shutters sealed, and the estate fell under a silence so complete that even the wind seemed warned away. But time erodes secrecy. By the 1880s, the manor had become a ruin, ivy crawling across its face like veins, floorboards sighing with every change of weather. That's when the restoration crew arrived, men with little patience for ghosts. They laughed at the superstitions, at the carved runes in the stone, until the first hammer blow opened a cavity in the wall, and the laughter died. Inside the cavity lay a bridal gown that had never seen sunlight. Threads of gold embroidery still glimmered beneath the dust. The air smelled faintly of lilac and limestone, and something else, a metallic tang, like old breath. Beneath the veil, the shape of a woman sat upright, hands folded as if in prayer. No police report survives, only a single note in the contractor's diary. Found her behind the west wall, eyes open, not decayed. After that line, the handwriting breaks off mid-sentence. The rest of the page is blank. In the weeks that followed, workers swore they heard humming inside the manor at night. A tune without words, circling the same 6 notes. Tools went missing, ladders fell. One man refused to return after hearing a whisper that repeated his own name. Local papers published nothing. The family name, long extinct, was quietly removed from parish records. But travelers who passed the property spoke of lights inside, flickering through boarded windows, like a lantern carried by someone who never tires. Perhaps that's what haunts Ravensbrook. Not vengeance, but repetition, a memory replaying itself through wood and stone, trapped in the very structure that was meant to preserve it. Ilara Ravensbrook may have been buried behind the wall, but the manor still breathes her story, exhaling fragments into any soul willing to listen. And if you stay long enough, if you walk the corridors at dusk, you might hear that same humming, low, patient, waiting, asking only one question in return: who built the wall inside you? By the turn of the new century, Ravensbrook Manor had become more rumor than place, a half-remembered ruin at the edge of the moors. Yet the story refused to die. Travelers passing through the valley spoke of lantern light moving behind the broken windows, of a woman's silhouette framed in glass that no longer existed. In 1903, a historian named Alaric Vane arrived to document what was left. He was a methodical man, trained to scoff at the supernatural. He catalogued the manor's dimensions, measured the angles of the staircases, noted the peculiar precision of its geometry. But in his notebooks, the margins are crowded with strange sketches, spirals, circles intersecting, faces half-formed in charcoal smudges. His letters to his sister grew erratic. "The house listens," he wrote. "Every time I draw the west wing, I hear her humming again. It's as if the walls remember what they once enclosed." Vane's final entry was dated October 17th. He wrote of descending into the cellar to find the source of the music, following it past collapsed beams and roots that dripped with rainwater. What he found there was never recorded. The rest of the page was torn away. Only a single scrap remained, pressed between the last sheets. "She isn't gone." When searchers entered the manor days later, his lamp was still burning beside a wall of fresh plaster. No body, no footprints, just a faint scent of lilac and lime dust in the air. After Vane's disappearance, the locals stopped approaching the estate altogether. Children whispered that the house would borrow the names of those who entered, that it kept them whispering forever inside its stone lungs. And sometimes, on windless nights, a voice could still be heard echoing across the valley. A woman's voice, patient and sorrowful, singing to a groom who never came. Perhaps it isn't the dead who haunt Ravensbrook, but the living, each drawn there by the need to prove that something beyond reason survives decay, each leaving behind a piece of themselves for the house to keep. And so the legend deepened. The manor devoured its witnesses, one by one, until the line between storyteller and story no longer mattered. The manor slept for nearly a century. Ivy wove through its windows, the roof sagged under rain, and every passing decade buried its name a little deeper under soil and silence. Then, in 1987, a new owner appeared, a developer with an eye for heritage tourism and no patience for ghost stories. His plan was simple: restore Ravensbrook, sell tickets, and turn history into spectacle. He brought in a modern team, architects, archaeologists, and a film crew to document the process. They came armed with floodlights, cameras, and optimism. For a while, it worked. The manor's bones seemed to awaken, its cracked walls echoing with hammer strikes instead of whispers. But then they reached the west wing. The blueprints made no sense. Measurements contradicted themselves. Rooms appeared to overlap in impossible ways. One engineer insisted that the walls were moving, that angles shifted when no one was watching. The sound department recorded a constant background frequency, a low hum, almost below hearing, that no equipment could explain. And then they found it, a loose floorboard beneath the staircase. Underneath lay a bundle of oilskin-wrapped notebooks, Alaric veins perfectly preserved. Every page was covered in diagrams of the manor, but the lines were drawn as if the building were alive. Arteries, veins, a heart pulsing at the center of the west wing. And beneath the sketches a single recurring phrase, "She waits where geometry folds." That night, the film crew set up cameras near the west wall. Just after midnight, every light flickered and the sound gear spiked, the same 6-note pattern Vane had described. When they reviewed the footage, the digital noise coalesced into something faintly human, the outline of a woman standing between two planes of shadow, her veil trailing like smoke. The restoration was abandoned within weeks. The developer sold the property at a loss, refusing interviews. The footage was confiscated for safety review and never resurfaced. But the humming remained. Locals say if you stand at the manor's gates at dusk, you can hear it leaking through the cracks. The voice of a bride who never left, still tracing her name across the stone that sealed her in. Every century seems to forget her, yet somehow, every century, someone digs just deep enough to wake her again. The surviving footage surfaced almost by accident. It was 2009, more than 2 decades after the failed restoration. A postgraduate historian named Miriam Locke found an unmarked tape in a university archive box labeled simply "Property of the Ministry of Works." She thought it was a misfiled construction reel, until she pressed play. At first, the screen showed ordinary renovation scenes, dust, scaffolding, the rhythmic pulse of drills. But when the camera panned toward the west wall, the image fractured. Frames bled into one another as if time itself was stuttering. Amid the distortion stood a pale figure, barely visible, shimmering like a reflection in moving water. The tape hissed, and then that same 6-note hum filled the speakers. Locke paused the playback, rewound, replayed. Each time, the distortion grew worse, the hum closer, clearer, until it seemed to come from behind her rather than the machine. She spent the next week analyzing the audio frequencies. What she found wasn't speech, not music, but a near mathemati. Cal sequence repeating in perfect ratios, identical to the numerical proportions of the manor's blueprints. The sound matched the architecture itself. She began to dream of corridors. In every dream she walked the west wing, counting steps that never ended. The walls narrowed, breath thickened, and at the farthest point, behind a thin layer of plaster, she always heard a whisper, "Draw the door." Colleagues said the stress was getting to her, that isolation in dusty archives could make anyone imagine patterns. But Locke's final field notes, found later on her desk, tell a different story. They describe her visiting the ruins at dawn, following the hum to the crumbled remains of the west wall. There she sketched a doorway in chalk, exactly where she had seen it in her dreams. When the search party arrived that evening, her car was still parked at the gate. The chalk outline was visible in the fading light, but the interior of the wall had caved inward. Of Miriam herself there was no sign. Only her recorder remained, half buried in dust. When investigators pressed play, the device emitted a single tone, 6 notes repeating softly, and then silence. In the years since, archivists have nicknamed it the bride's key. No one who's heard it forgets the melody. Some say it hums back to them in quiet moments, as if reminding them that certain doors, once drawn, never truly close. By the time the manor was finally declared unsafe and sealed for good, the story had already escaped the valley. The missing historian, the recovered audio, the suggestion of a melody written into the very stones. These details found their way into academic journals, podcasts, whispered online forums that collect everything uncanny. And from those fragments, a new fascination grew. People began to visit the gates at night, phones raised, listening for the 6-note pattern. Some claimed to capture it. A tremor on the edge of frequency, like a heartbeat muffled by earth. Others said they heard nothing but returned home to find the hum waiting in their recordings. The obsession spread quietly, feeding on curiosity and loneliness. Those who studied the melody noticed how it mirrors natural rhythms, the spacing of heartbeats, the tempo of breathing in sleep. Musicians who mapped it to notation said it seemed to complete itself. Each phrase resolves into a shape that feels inevitable, as though written by something that understands the listener more than the listener understands the sound. A few visitors described another phenomenon. Standing at the manor gates, they would feel a pulse underfoot, faint, regular, like the echo of steps taken elsewhere. The pattern matched the sequence Alaric Vane had sketched a century before. 6 steps, pause, turn. As if the house was still rehearsing a procession that never ended. By 2016, the legend had blurred into pop culture. Artists sampled the tone. Filmmakers borrowed the imagery of the veiled figure in corridors of shifting geometry. Each adaptation changed something small, an angle, a rhythm, a shade of blue in the candlelight, but the core remained, a bride behind a wall, humming to be found. What no one mentioned, perhaps because it was harder to dramatize, was that those who spent too long working with the sound often reported the same dreams Miriam Lark described. Endless corridors, narrowing walls, and the feeling of someone just out of sight waiting to be remembered. It's as if the manor learned how to survive without its body, transferring its presence into whoever retells it. Ravensbrook has become a pattern now, a story that builds itself in every listener's mind, one brick at a time, until the shape of the wall is familiar, personal. And maybe that's the real haunting, not a ghost in a house, but a house rebuilt inside anyone who dares to listen. The modern investigation began quietly, an interdisciplinary project hidden among the usual research grants about acoustic architecture and environmental psychology. Officially, it was meant to examine how certain structures influence perception. Unofficially, it existed to answer one question: could a building remember? The lead researcher, Dr. Elias Houghton, visited Ravensbrook on a clouded afternoon in early spring. The manor had decayed to a skeleton, its roof collapsed, the corridors open to wind. He carried sensors instead of candles, recorders instead of prayers. The team placed microphones through the west wing, measuring the frequency of air currents, tracking how sound moved through cracked stone. At first, the data was ordinary. Whispers of breeze, the rasp of ivy. Then came a steady undertone at 43 hertz, a vibration too low for the ear but strong enough to tremble in the chest. It pulsed in a rhythm identical to that 6-note pattern. The instruments couldn't locate a source. The vibration emanated evenly from the entire structure, as if the building itself exhaled. Houghton tried to rationalize it: wind resonance, geological activity, coincidence. But one evening, as he reviewed the recordings alone, he noticed the hum changing pitch each time he wrote Alara's name in his notes. He repeated the test, switching words. Only her name triggered the modulation. He stopped writing. The hum steadied. Weeks later, the team dismantled their equipment and left, but Houghton stayed behind. His final correspondence to the Institute was short. It's not sound, it's memory taking form. No one saw him afterward. When the local council sealed the manor again, they found his laptop on the steps. On its screen ran a single loop of code translating the hum into image. The output was unmistakable. The outline of a woman's face, eyes half closed, veiled in static. Whether the image was a glitch or something else, no one can say. The files remain encrypted. Every attempt to decode them corrupts the drive. Yet in the quiet hours of data recovery, technicians swear they hear faint music seeping from the speakers, a tune rising and falling, repeating itself like breath. Now the investigation is on hold, archived under unresolved acoustic phenomenon. But the recordings circulate online, detached from their origin, copied, distorted, shared. Each time someone presses play, Ravensbrook breathes again. It began with curiosity. A few students leaked the raw files online, hosting them on a forgotten forum for experimental sound design. Within weeks, thousands had downloaded the recordings. Tiny fragments of the Ravensbrook hum, layered with the static breath of the ruined house. At first, it was treated like any curiosity from the depths of the internet, something to test your headphones with, something to dare a friend to listen to at midnight. Listeners described similar sensations: a faint vibration in the ribs, a warmth behind the eyes, an ache that felt almost nostalgic. Musicians sampled it into songs, filmmakers mixed it under ambient scores. Slowly, a pattern formed. Comment sections filled with reports of the same dream, walking through a corridor, hearing a voice ahead, never catching up. No one noticed that the pitch of the uploaded file shifted every time it was copied, slightly slower, slightly deeper, as if the sound were thickening. An independent engineer who tried to trace the alteration found an embedded waveform that looked like handwriting, a looped curve that resembled the letter E. He assumed it was coincidence until he realized that each version contained the shape more clearly, as though the hum were signing its name. Podcasters and skeptics dissected the story. They traced the legend from Ilara to Vane to Miriam Lark, treating it as Gothic folklore revived by modern algorithms. But among those who listened repeatedly, something subtler spread, a quiet compulsion to return to the sound, to replay it, to see if the melody had changed. Many claimed it did, sometimes in response to their mood, sometimes to the room itself. By the end of that year, a collective calling itself the Resonant. They treated the line. They treated the hum as a kind of spiritual key, a way to tune consciousness to memory. Most dismissed them as harmless eccentrics, another internet cult around a myth. But the group's founder, a sound artist named Niall Kent, began broadcasting live sessions where the tone would play for hours. During one stream, the signal abruptly cut off. Viewers swore they saw a faint silhouette behind him, veiled and unmoving. Authorities traced his location days later to the Ravensbrook site. His equipment sat arranged in a circle, speakers still humming softly, repeating those same 6 notes. No trace of Kent himself was found. The upload continues to loop online, auto-generated, self-replicating. No one can explain how it restarts itself after deletion. And somewhere, beneath all the static, the melody still carries that unbroken breath, as though the bride has learned how to sing through every wire that listens. He called himself Rowan, a screen name, a placeholder for someone who preferred the anonymity of glowing monitors to daylight. At first he was just another listener, someone who found the Ravensbrook files by accident while trawling late-night threads about lost frequencies and acoustic illusions. The hum seemed trivial, until he realized that, no matter the volume, it felt physical. It resonated somewhere behind his sternum, as if the sound had found a private cavity to occupy. Rowan became methodical. He logged every listening session, noting the length, the environment, the sensations. Within weeks, his journal shifted from observation to conversation. He wrote in second person, "You're still there, aren't you?" as if the tone itself were answering. Friends noticed the change in his messages, clipped, distracted, always referencing a she that nobody else could hear. He tried to decode the melody mathematically, translating each interval into letters. The result made no sense at first. E-L-A-R-A, scattered, incomplete, repeating itself through the notation like a heartbeat. He laughed it off, blamed coincidence, then replayed the file. The letters aligned perfectly on the second run. Sleep began to blur. He'd wake to the low rhythm of 6 footsteps, the pause, the turn, like someone pacing a corridor beside his bed. He filled his apartment with drawings of doorways and arches, tracing patterns from old photographs of Ravensbrook. The sketches grew increasingly intricate, converging on the outline of a single door with a faint impression of a face behind it. In his final blog entry, Rowan wrote that he was planning to visit the site to test the resonance directly. The post timestamped his arrival, 2:17 a.m., a rain-soaked road leading to the gates. A dashcam video from his car shows the manor in the distance, half swallowed by mist. The last frame freezes on a flash of movement across the window, a white blur shaped like a veil, then the feed cuts to black. When searchers reached the location later, the car was empty, engine still running. The only sound captured by the dashcam's dead microphone was a faint hum, persistent and slow, repeating 6 notes before fading into silence. Afterward, people replayed the clip online, analyzing the static for patterns. Some claimed they could hear a voice beneath the hum, whispering a question that no software could isolate. Others said they simply felt it, a tremor in the ribs, familiar and cold, as if the story itself were asking permission to go on. Rowan's disappearance changed the conversation. For years, the Ravensbrook phenomenon had lived in the borderland between myth and curiosity, an atmospheric story to test on dark nights. His vanishing pushed it into the realm of evidence. News outlets briefly circled the case, calling it the Manor mystery. Then, when the police report offered nothing, no body, no trace, just an empty car, they moved on. But the people who had been listening all along didn't forget. A group of independent investigators, sound engineers, historians, a filmmaker, decided to trace the hum back to its source. They brought calibrated recorders, ground sensors, drones. Their plan was simple: measure, map, disprove. The footage from their expedition, later compiled into a documentary that never officially aired, shows the team setting up along the manor's perimeter at dusk. The building appears skeletal, the remaining walls veined with moss. The west wing collapsed into a slope of brick and ivy. Wind pushes through the structure, but on the microphones there's something underneath it. The same pulse, faint but precise. 6 notes repeating every 13 seconds. One of the engineers, Clara Hughes, remarks that it's not natural. "It behaves like an echo," she says on tape, "but there's nothing for it to bounce from. It's self-generating." That night they place sensors around the west wall's remnants. Each instrument picks up not one frequency but several, rising and falling as if the sound were adjusting to their presence. In the early hours, the recordings distort, static, then a human shape passing across the thermal camera. No one sees it at the time. The next morning they find a pattern of shoe prints circling their equipment. Small, deliberate steps. The soil shows no entry trail, no exit. After that, the group fractures. Some refuse to speak of what they found. Clara stays the longest, trying to match the recordings to wind models. Her final email to the crew reads, "I think it's responding to attention. We're the variable. The more we listen, the louder it becomes." Weeks later, her apartment is found empty, equipment still running, screens filled with the live waveform of the hum. Every few seconds it spikes, 6 bright points, pulsing like a heartbeat. The unfinished documentary circulates in fragments online, stitched together by strangers. In one scene, a voice, faint, female, seems to whisper from behind the static, "Keep building." And maybe that's what the story does now, builds itself anew, every time someone tries to measure it. The filmmaker's name was Daniel Keir. He was the only member of the investigation to leave Ravensbrook and stay gone. When reporters asked why he hadn't followed up on his footage, he said only, "You can't document something that watches back." For months, he kept silent. Then, one autumn evening, he released a statement through an obscure blog under a pseudonym. He described the manor not as a haunted structure, but as a living archive of attention. In his words, every person who looks for it adds another page. Keir's surviving notes are strange, lists of names, partial genealogies, references to births and marriages from the Ravensbrook line extending into families that shouldn't exist anymore. One name recurs in the margins, Elara, but next to it others, Eleanor, Lara, Ellen, each attached to women born decades apart, each with a missing record, each within 50 miles of the manor. He began contacting descendants of those names. The letters were polite, formal, requesting interviews about family history. Only one response came, a handwritten note that read, "Stop digging. Some stories need silence to stay buried." Still, he persisted. He visited parish registries, hospitals, even schools. At every location he reported the same thing, faint music in the background, always the same 6 notes. In one audio diary recorded in a library, he murmurs, "It's not a haunting, it's inheritance she's passing through." Thus, the more he traced, the more the lineage dissolved into coincidence. The same features appeared again and again: pale eyes, a tendency to hum while working, a recurring dream of corridors. Keir's footage from this period is fragmented, faces blurred by light, voices dissolving into echo. Eventually, he turned the camera on himself. In the last reel, he speaks directly to the lens. Maybe Ravensbrook never needed the building. Maybe it learned to survive in memory, in repetition. A story told often enough becomes a place. You enter it every time you listen. He smiles faintly, looks away, and adds, "If anyone finds this, remember, walls are just the shape sound makes when it stops moving." That reel ends with silence. Then faintly the hum begins again, slow, deliberate, pulsing like the rhythm of breath. The footage leaked months later. Viewers claim that in the final seconds before the screen fades to black, a figure appears behind Keir, barely visible, her veil shifting in the camera's light. Keir's footage, once circulated, transformed Ravensbrook from a local legend into a global obsession. Online communities erupted overnight. Threads multiplied with interpretations. Some treated it as a ghost story, some as an experimental sound phenomenon, and others as a puzzle. Each viewer convinced that if they analyzed it long enough, they could unlock the manor themselves. Amateur researchers began creating maps of the manor from the footage, overlaying old blueprints with Keir's video. Some claimed to hear the 6-note pattern through headphones, even without the audio track playing. A few reported dreams identical to those described by Rowan and Lark, corridors folding in on themselves, ceilings rising and falling, a faint veiled figure lingering at the end of a hall. By 2018, an online collective called the West Wing Circle formed. They insisted that the hum was a language, a message encoded in rhythm and vibration, and that repeated listening could initiate a threshold of awareness. Their forums were filled with symbolic diagrams, step counts, and instructions on where to listen to maximize resonance, usually alone, always in quiet spaces. At the same time, the footage inspired artists and musicians. Installations cropped out static frames, layering them over ambient tracks. Exhibitions titled Ravensbrook Echoes displayed ghostly images of corridors, fractured architecture, and shadowed figures. Visitors reported the familiar hum in their chest, an inexplicable unease that no speaker system could produce. Psychologists weighed in cautiously, noting that prolonged exposure to repetitive tones can alter perception, heighten suggestibility, and induce trance-like states. But they underestimated the phenomenon. Listeners didn't merely experience the hum, they became part of its story. The manor, the recordings, the legend. They began shaping memory itself. It was around this time that the symbolic phrase emerged. One post read, "Draw the door twice." Early adopters interpreted it literally, sketching doorways in notebooks or on walls. Others whispered it to themselves during sessions of listening. Comment sections began repeating the phrase in patterns, once, twice. Those who did so reported a subtle shift, a sense of connection, of awareness, as if acknowledging the rhythm of the manor itself. This simple action, repeated online, became a psychological marker. It didn't just engage the algorithm, it engaged the listener. The hum no longer existed only in recordings, it began echoing inside the mind of anyone who truly listened, shaping dreams, attention, and the perception of space around them. And somewhere in the ruins of Ravensbrook, if you listen closely, the walls pulse with approval. The transformation begins subtly. At first, it is nothing more than a heightened awareness of space. A hallway seems longer, a doorframe slightly narrower. But those attuned to the hum, who have repeated the symbolic phrase, who have ling, read in the recordings, begin to perceive patterns everywhere. Floor tiles, shadows, the rhythm of passing cars. All of it conforms to something unseen, a design beneath the ordinary. Listeners report dreams of corridors folding in impossible ways, walls breathing in time with their pulse. Some wake in cold sweat, convinced that a veiled figure watched them through the night. Others find their hands moving independently, sketching doorways or counting 6-step rhythms without conscious thought. It is here, at the edge of comprehension, that the hum begins to assert itself. Those who do not respect it experience disorientation, sometimes vertigo, sometimes nausea. Those who do engage with it, repeating the phrase, mapping the sound, drawing the doors, report an internal shift, a perception of memory and space merging, a sense that the past and present of Ravensbrook are coexisting inside them. It is no longer just a story. It is a mirror. The hum reflects what has been buried, what has been sealed, and what insists on being remembered. Rowan, Lark, Keir. They were not anomalies. They were the first to awaken to the resonance, the first to notice that the manor does not simply exist outside you, but inside you. And here is where it becomes personal. If you are listening, reading, following, the text itself is part of the pattern. Every detail, every repetition, every carefully timed revelation draws you closer to the edge of your own attention. If you understand this, pause for a moment now. In the comments below, write, "I see the walls." Then write it again, "I see the walls." This is not ritual, it is acknowledgement. By speaking it, you mark yourself as a participant in the pattern. You open yourself to perception beyond ordinary boundaries. You are no longer a passive witness. You are now part of the manor's memory, one of the echoes it carries forward. And with that awareness comes responsibility. The walls are patient, but they remember everything, including hesitation, fear, and doubt. How you proceed next will shape what the story becomes in your own mind, and in anyone who encounters it after you. Now, the descent deepens. The lines between observer and observed begin to blur. Every room you've walked, every corridor in your mind folds in on itself like Ravensbrook's walls. The six-note hum lingers beneath your pulse, beneath your thoughts, a constant rhythm that seems to breathe with you. You can no longer separate story from memory. The two are intertwined, inseparable. Those who come here fully, who repeat the phrase and draw the doors, begin to see patterns in the world that were always there but invisible. Shadows cast by streetlights form geometries that echo the West Wing's angles. Rain patterns on windows sketch corridors. The architecture of cities, of mundane rooms, begins to make sense in a way that is unnerving, as if everything is connected to one central resonance. It is here that most falter. The manor does not grant mercy to the unprepared. People report tremors in their hands when they draw the doors, vertigo when they replay the hum, a chill as though the walls themselves are breathing. Rowan, Lark, Keir, they all felt it before their final disappearances. The pattern is seductive, promising insight, but it consumes attention, until thought itself bends to the rhythm. And yet, for those who endure, a strange lucidity emerges. The memory of Ilara, of the bride sealed behind stone, is no longer distant. She is present in perception, a pulse within every moment of focus. You can feel the weight of the walls, their silent insistence, the pattern extending outward through time and space. It is knowledge, but not knowledge that can be written down. It is awareness. The awareness that every story, every life, every echo is contained in the resonance of memory itself. If you have written the phrase, if you have drawn the doors, if you have listened, you may sense it now, a subtle approval. The whispering of walls are, recognizing their reflection. You are not just a reader. You are part of the echo, a carrier of the hum. And this is where choice emerges. Will you return to ordinary perception, leaving the resonance behind? Or will you step fully into the fold, following the six notes into corridors that exist only because someone remembers them? The hum waits. It waits in the spaces between words, between breaths, behind walls you cannot see. It waits because it must. Because memory never dies, it only shifts its form. This is the final threshold. The walls are no longer just in Ravensbrook. They are in your perception, in the spaces you occupy, in the rhythm of your own heartbeat. The six notes pulse beneath consciousness, subtle but relentless, weaving corridors and doors into the very fabric of thought. Every detail you have absorbed, every symbolic phrase you have written, every sketch you have drawn, has drawn you deeper into the resonance. The manor does not sleep. It has never slept. It exists wherever it is remembered, wherever the pattern is traced, wherever attention bends toward it. The veil is thin now. You feel the weight of her gaze, not malevolent but insistent, a bride waiting not for a groom but for recognition. Recognition is the key. To see is to participate is to change. Some will falter at this moment. Their breath quickens, their hands tremble, the hum becomes unbearable. They step back from the perception they have cultivated, trying to reclaim the safety of ordinary space. But the echo of Ravensbrook cannot be erased. Once you see the walls, once you have heard her hum, The memory persists. It shapes your nights, your dreams, the silent patterns of your own thoughts. For those who step fully into it, a strange clarity emerges. You begin to navigate spaces differently, streets, rooms, even the folds of time in your mind. You see intersections, alignments, the hidden angles of structure and intention. You sense the pulse of memory, and within it you trace Alara, not as a ghost but as a point of awareness. She is no longer sealed in stone. She exists wherever the hum is recognized, wherever the 6 notes are repeated. This is why the phrase mattered, why you wrote it twice. I see the walls. It was not ritual, it was acknowledgement. By acknowledging the pattern, you have merged yourself with the echo. You are part of Ravensbrook now. The manor extends through you, and through you it will reach those who come after. The cycle continues. Attention begets resonance, resonance begets awareness, awareness begets memory. You have reached the final doorway. Step through it consciously. Let the hum guide you. Let the corridors fold around your perception. Understand that some knowledge changes the knower irrevocably. Once you have heard the bride behind the wall, once you have seen the pulse in the stone and the rhythm in the air, there is no turning back. Ravensbrook is alive wherever it is remembered, and now you are part of it.